You're welcome.
Hello, everybody. My name is Angela Speck. I am one of the two co-chairs of the American Astronomical Society's Solar Eclipse Task Force, not just Total Eclipse, along with Claire Raftery, whose voice you will hear from time to time. I'm going to be the MC sort of for today. So I'm going to be introducing people, but before we do that, I would like to just orient you to this. Some of you may not have attended the session yesterday, so I just want to orient people to how this works. If you are an attendee, the chat is disabled. We can send you chats, but you can't chat to us. However, there is a Q&A. So we would like you to post your questions for the speakers in the Q&A box. You'll find the Q&A thing at the bottom of your Zoom screen. The other things I'd like to mention are we are recording this and it will be posted to YouTube after the workshop. We've got yesterday's recordings almost ready. And there's also a program online at our Eclipse workshop page on the eclipse.aas.org page. So if you want to see what the running order is, that is on the Eclipse workshop webpage. Some of you already joined us this morning for the virtual networking lounge, which was a lot of fun. And there'll be another one in the break between the two panels today. So the virtual networking lounge is basically a space where we can get together and chat, kind of like we would if we were in person. You can chat with other people. There are breakout rooms. Yesterday, I was in the room for Texas, and we had a fun chat. This morning, we kind of stayed all together, and it was a fairly wide-ranging chat, but it was really useful. So that's a great thing to do in between the two sessions. Hopefully somebody else can post the link into the chat. You should also have received the link by email. Now, for that networking lounge, you will, when you click on it, it will ask you to leave this Zoom. You need to do that, and then you can come back to this Zoom using the same link that you joined this morning. You can come back at the end of the break. Okay, so having said all of that, I am going to introduce our panel leader, and then she will introduce everybody else. So let me make sure I have the right information in front of me. It is my pleasure to introduce Laura Peticolas. Laura is a space scientist and educator co-leading EdEon, a grant-funded STEM learning department at Sonoma State University. While at the University of California, Berkeley, and with a team at Google and others, such as the ASP, she led an initiative for the 2017 eclipse called the Eclipse Mega Movie. The Mega Movie trained people to take photographs of total solar eclipse and gathered photographs of the solar corona and chromosphere seen at totality. She believes that the Eclipse Mega Movie database is the largest known collection of eclipse photographs. While the science team aimed for scientifically relevant data, the goal that drove many on the team was to lure people into the path of totality and engage those already living in those areas. Laura's week-long treks across America to recruit and engage local and rural communities in the 2017 Path of Totality in the months prior to the big event made her appreciate the diversity of local responses to the 2017 eclipse. Laura is pleased to be part of the AAS task force and the leader for this session. She's going to moderate the session today live from her home in Sonoma, California. Take it away, Laura.
Thank you, Angela. It's great to be here, and welcome to everyone from around the world. I know we've got people from Australia and all the time zones in the US and probably beyond. So this is wonderful. It's, for most of us, Saturday. Today, welcome to this local community planning eclipse session. You are going to hear today from many who know what it takes to plan for an upcoming total solar eclipse. And I know a lot of you are here today because you plan to do work with your local communities or maybe others. And this work involves partnerships between local government, business, nonprofits, and academia, amongst many others. It involves preparing citizens and local leaders on solar eclipse education, safety, and entertainment. For some communities, especially those under the path of totality, it can mean doubling the population of the town for 2 to 3 days, or simply filling hotels to capacity. Speakers in this session will share their experience with working in these communities, such communities, to prepare for a total solar eclipse. And they'll share their recommendations for planning the upcoming eclipses, So we'll hear from our panelists. Kate, I'm just going to kind of give you an overview of the session. In the next 20 minutes, Kate Russo will give us a plenary talk, and then we'll have 3 panelists join Kate. That's Trish, Erzfeld, Derrick Pitts, and Jennifer Godfrey for a panel discussion after each of the 3 panelists present 5 minutes on their past experience with eclipse planning. So we will have 10 minutes for questions after Kate speaks, and then we'll go into the panelists' presentations and then do Q&A after that. All right, so now I'd like to introduce our plenary speaker. Dr. Kate Russo is an Australian author, psychologist, and eclipse chaser. She's a member of the AAS Solar Eclipse Task Force and author of the White Paper on Community Eclipse Planning, a guide published in 2015 that was used across the US in preparation for the 2017 eclipse. Kate understands how exciting it is to live within the path of totality and to be involved in preparing your community. She also understands the challenges. In her plenary, she will provide an overview to how to approach community eclipse planning, rather than focus on specific details. Her aim is to give you confidence about what is to come. Kate's delighted to be talking with you and is live from her home in tropical North Queensland at the ungodly hour of 3 a.m. And you all may notice that Kate's background is flipped, and we've decided this is because she's down under. So Kate, take it away.
Thank you very much. Thank you. I'm just opening up my screen share now. That's an A-OK for this share? Good, thank you. Well, good morning, everyone. Good afternoon. Really great to be here. Hopefully there's so much to talk about with community eclipse planning, and the danger is I can talk for hours and days on it. So I'm going to try and be as precise and concise as possible. Just checking I can't seem to move my slides forward.
Try using your arrow key, see if that works.
Okay, I've got that. So yesterday we had a good session. Angela gave a really good overview about the opportunities that are coming for 2024, but also the annular in 2023. We also heard about eye safety. I'm going to be doing this presentation focused on the communities all along the path of totality who are preparing for the eclipse of 23, but also 24, mostly 24. And, I know there's a lot of educators listening in at the moment, but I'm really speaking to those communities within the path. So you might be someone who's working in tourism or business, who lives in the path and who is responsible for planning. So that's my focus today. And we can't get through everything. And hopefully the question and answer session will answer more specifics. And the panel later on will be able to draw upon people's experiences. We've got some amazing people on the panel. But for my session here, I just want to make sure that we engage, so we understand what's involved in eclipse planning, that we educate. So I've got some resources that might be helpful and some starting points for you. But also give you a bit of empowerment, because I know it can be quite a frightening, scary thing. There's a lot of unknowns in eclipse planning, but I just want to give you a very reassuring message that you can do this. It's going to be amazing for your community. And if you are in the lucky position to be an eclipse coordinator, you'll just find that the most amazing experience ever. So I'll spend a few minutes talking about my background, focusing on eclipse consulting, and then I'll talk about what the eclipse means for you, the path of totality, what it means for you, and then I'll focus on developing your strategy. So I'm an eclipse chaser. I've been chasing since '99, it's unbelievable, but that's 21 years of chasing. I've seen 12 total eclipses. It's this 13th, unlucky 13, is quite elusive due to COVID, and I'm sure everyone's feeling frustrated about that. I've seen 2 annular eclipses. And I now lead eclipse tours for people. And I tell you, it's such a privilege to be able to help people plan to be in the path of totality to see their first eclipse. It's just a wonderful experience. By day, I'm actually a clinical psychologist. I've been working for about 25 years. I focus on the health specialism. And in Australia now, I'm in private practice at a group clinic. Over the years, I've had extensive experience in consulting, doing lots of workshops, change management, team dynamics, communication, sat on steering committees, run national programs. So there's a lot of transferable skills that I've been able to translate into the eclipse realm that I think has been quite helpful. And one of the important ones is because my academic approach is using phenomenological research. And that just means that I explore the lived experience of people's issues and concerns. And right from the start, I recognized that the eclipse experience is something so unique and so wonderfully different. You know, it's the intense awe that we feel that is amazing, the roller coaster of emotions. And you have to ask, why does an astronomical event trigger so much emotions in us? So that's why I started to really approach that question, because I wanted to understand the experience for myself, and other people were asking me as a psychologist, like, well, what's it all about? So I felt that I needed to research it. I've been pretty busy over the last 10 years doing a whole program of research. I've published 3 books on eclipses. I take on a number of different projects that's aimed to answer some of the questions that are out there. I've contributed to numerous articles. I do lots of events, workshops, and speaking, and a lot of media. And I've done the white paper on community eclipse planning, which I'll go into in a little bit. The eclipse planning coordination, I sort of fell into because I was lucky enough, like some of you here for 2017 and 24, I was lucky enough to be from the path of totality, or just outside of it, for the path in 2012. And because I was living in the UK for over 20 years, I decided I was going to come home and see the eclipse, be on the ground in the 6 months leading up to the eclipse, and use that opportunity to be able to do one of my research projects where I wanted to interview people before they saw their first total eclipse, and then interview the same people afterwards and try and capture that sense of change. What is it that actually happens when we experience an eclipse, and how does that change our life view? And so I was doing a lot of events and meeting a lot of people on the ground, and I was discovering time and time again, all these conversations I was having with people, that the local community were not engaged with the eclipse. They didn't really realize that it was going to be, why it was such a big deal, how lucky they were. And, we chase these eclipses anywhere, and they just had to step outside, but they didn't understand that the eclipse was for them. And talking to them further, it just seemed to be that the media was always focused on stories of traffic chaos, how much money it was going to bring into the economy, but what a lot of hassle it was. And it was really turning people off. And this was despite some really great planning and amazing resources that were developed for the eclipse. The people on the ground were just not hearing it or relating to it. And because these were my people, they were my family, friends, relatives, people I grew up with, both in and outside of the path of totality, I just felt that I had to do something. And I felt that it was the sharing of the eclipse experience that was missing, and that's what was needed to engage people. So I did all I could on the ground to be able to convey that sense of excitement and what happens to us during totality. And after the eclipse, and I think that worked really well. And after the eclipse, I was still continuing my interviews with people on the ground, and it just showed how important the experience was when you're trying to reach people, everyday normal people on the ground, to convey to them that the eclipse is relevant for you. You don't have to be a scientist or an astronomer, or, as I say, a bearded man with a telescope to enjoy the experience. It's a human experience. And after that, I decided it was so important to look at eclipse planning and how it was done on the ground. And I did a series of interviews with the coordinators of the eclipse for 2012. And I put together a bit of a strategy about how you would approach it by also including the community. And I was able to put this into place for the next opportunity in 2015 for the Faroe Islands. Now, I was living in Belfast in Northern Ireland at the time. So if you don't know where the Faroe Islands is, it's kind of remote. It's, near Iceland and Greenland. It's an archipelago of 18 islands, and the whole islands were in the path of totality for 2015. So 2 years before the eclipse, I went over in my capacity. I was doing eclipse tours, so I was bringing 145 people to the islands. But I did initial outreach because they didn't have a strategy in place. They didn't really know what to do. And then a year on, I went over and I took part in a panel which set up some sort of strategy. And then I actually physically relocated to the Faroes 6 weeks prior to the eclipse. And I became a full-time advisor on the ground, working with the team that were there. And we really did a lot to engage the community. And a really key thing, and it mirrored my experience in 2012, people relate to the eclipse experience, what it's like to experience totality and why it's so important for you. And I would do my presentations in English. I do not speak Faroese. And there was a gentleman who was alive during the previous eclipse in 1954. And he remembered what it was like. And he would come and talk about his experience. And I do not speak Faroese, but I could follow every single word. I knew where he was up to in his story, and how he spoke and how he conveyed that sense really was very powerful. And I think we did a great job in the Faroes to to really involve the community. And if you think about it, once every 375 years, an eclipse happens in a particular location. So for a community, it really is a once in a lifetime opportunity. For chasers, we chase once every 18 months or so. But for a community, it's so special. And I think we really did a great job of bringing everything together and really creating a sense of event. And the legacy of that has been pretty powerful. You can Google what's happened to the Faroe Islands since. But I wanted to capture what we did, all the work that was put into that. And so I put together a white paper on community eclipse planning, because I could see in 2017, there were so many communities that were going to have to prepare for totality. And there was a lack of information around, because there hadn't been an eclipse on US soil since 1979, a total eclipse. And so people weren't really aware of how big it was going to be or where to get started in planning. So I made that freely available, and I provided a lot of online consultations to people living in especially the small and rural communities across the path of totality. I did a number of online events, and one day, if you ever see me, you can talk about the saga, the 3-year saga of trying to actually relocate to the US for another time. But I did what I could without being on the ground. And I'm since, I did a number of consultations, and those were recorded because I wanted to capture the process of eclipse planning for 2017. So afterwards, we can actually draw upon all the vast experience that people have. So before the eclipse and then after the eclipse, I again have interviewed a number of coordinators. And so you'll be pleased to know that I'm about to update the white paper on community eclipse planning. So how to make sense of the path of totality for your community, because it's one thing to hear that there is a path, that you're in the path, but what do you make of that? How do you, what do you do? What's your first steps? So yesterday, Angela and Rick were referring to a number of different map makers. And so this is a map from Xavier Jubier. And this shows the overall path of totality for this eclipse. Now, an eclipse chaser will approach this in a number of ways. So there are a number of factors into how we determine where we're going to be for a total, to experience totality. And there's no time to go into all of those factors, but the biggest one is weather, because if it's cloudy at your eclipse site, the eclipse is still going to happen, but you're not going to be able to see the visuals. You won't see the spectacular corona, which is the main show of the event. But because totality happens above you, around you, and within you, you can still experience some pretty cool things if it's cloudy. So you can still feel the temperature change. the chills, the awe, the primal fear that you have. It gets dark. It gets even ominously darker during a cloudy eclipse. So if you're a community and the weather forecast is not so great, don't panic, because it will still be very memorable, very special, but it will make you want to travel into the path for another total eclipse to experience the full thing. But eclipse chasers will do all we can to avoid locations that will give us, that there's a high probability of cloud. But what happens for planners is that they assume that everybody thinks like eclipse chasers. And in fact, they don't. When you're on the ground in a community, if we make our plans according to eclipse chasers, that's only a very small proportion. There's also tour groups that come in. There's astronomers and scientists. There's photographers. There's outreach, people doing outreach. But the far biggest numbers is going to be the lucky locals, people already living within the path of totality. And for this path in 24, there are 32 million people living in that path. So they are going to be the bulk of people who are going to experience this. And if any of you live near the path of totality for 24 or the annular in 23 or even 2017, you'll know all of a sudden you'll have these long lost friends and relatives that really want to come and stay with you. So, that expands the people in the path of totality. Then you've got the people who've experienced it in 2017. They want to have another go at it. Then you've got the crowd that are, the fear of missing out. They might have not seen it in 2017. So they're really going to make a point of getting into the path of totality for this one. And of course, you'll always have those last minuters, people who don't seem to hear about it or don't really know. They make a split decision to get into the path. They don't have any bookings, but they drive in and try and experience that way. So there's a number of consumers, I guess, when you're planning. And we know this eclipse is going to be even bigger. The path is wider compared to 2017. The population within the path is huge. There is a longer duration of the total phase of the eclipse. There is greater awareness of the eclipse because the last one happened in 2017. And I think we need to come up with an interesting term. We've had break the internet. We've had bigger than the Super Bowl. This is going to be huge. Looking at the impact of 2017, this really is going to be a big event. So how do you go about planning? How do you start? And I'm quoting this. I didn't hear this once. I heard this many times when I was doing my consultations with people along the path. We don't need to plan. It's going to happen anyway. And yeah, there's absolutely truth in that. No matter it, this is why we feel so insignificant during totality. We don't have a lot of control in life, and a total eclipse reminds you of that. And it's true. If you think of the total eclipse as a one-off event that's going to happen on a day that you just have to plan for people to come, see it, and then go, you're missing a huge opportunity for your community. And it will happen. And no matter what you do, it's still going to be amazing. But it's about taking advantage of that opportunity that really is unique if you're in the path. This is a very busy slide, but I'm going to talk about it very briefly. In 2017, the more consults I did with people, the more I started to see that there were themes happening. So there's one group that were like the evangelical embracers. So these are the communities that they knew that it was going to be big. They started planning years in advance, and often they had some external validation for why it was going to be big for them. For example, they might have been near the point of greatest eclipse. They might have been at a point where the weather was going to be have the best chance of clear skies during totality. Or at the eclipse crossroads of 2017 and 2024. But for some, there's unique circumstances that made them recognize, yes, this is going to be big, we're going to go for it. And they often got themselves a dedicated eclipse coordinator, or they really gave that time to a single person who really went gangbusters. And a lot of those communities really did so well, and the impact has been huge. Then you have the community champions. And I think this is more representative of those smaller communities across the path, the ones that seem to miss out on a lot of the resources or workshops or training. I think sometimes the resources tend to be concentrated in areas of larger population. So it's the smaller ones that sort of miss out. But there's usually a community champion, someone who's just so passionate about it, they see it and they want their community to make the most of it. And they've got the backing of the mayor and some key stakeholders. And so it's really exciting to work with community champions. They're so driven. Then we have the watchful waiters. These are people in the community that they're not really sure how to go about it. They don't have that sense of passion that the community champions do, often because they're volunteered to take on organising the eclipse as part of their normal everyday activities without a recognition of how big it's going to be. And they don't really either have the resources or the skills or the confidence or leadership to be able to move things forward. So I think it's a bit of an anxious time for these people. But what they tend to do is watch what other communities are doing, and then they try and apply that to their own community. So they're making reactive plans, but they're not making proactive plans or leading things. They have a great experience, but it could have been something that they could have taken advantage of a bit more. And then the unsupported heroes. These are the people who will come out of the blue and just say, look, I'm in this community, I don't have any support. I've tried to raise it at meetings and no one feels that we're going to be able to do anything for the eclipse. And these people get so frustrated that they're passionate. They could be someone who could be doing a lot, or like a community champion. And sadly, a lot of these people have then decided to travel elsewhere to see the eclipse. So I guess when you're looking, try and think about what community you are, where you are, and what do you think you would like to have as your approach. The eclipse legacy is huge. If you want to take advantage of this eclipse opportunity, it's not just about bringing people in and the money that it brings in. You actually form new partnerships with people, and because you work over a period of time, you establish a sense of cohesion, which that can be changing for a community. It's very, very strong, very empowering. There's the direct money impact, of course, and that's huge. And maybe the people on the panel will be able to share that with you. The PR value is amazing because it's, the media really want to know about communities in the path. They want stories. They're hungry for stories. And so if you're proactive with the media, you can actually use this as an opportunity to get information about your community out there, not just for the eclipse, but for the future. The knock-on effect on tourism is huge because it's not just for the eclipse. If people come in, have a great experience, they're sharing it with all their networks and they want to come back. So they're really going to be your community ambassadors. And it's that sense of cohesion and connection across the whole community too. When you involve the community, it really does, generations come together to experience the eclipse and you can feel it. It's just wonderful. So here are some planning resources. Again, another very busy slide, but I wanted to just highlight a couple of them. So Rick mentioned yesterday that the eclipse.aas.org website isn't about reinventing the wheel, and there's a lot of resources that are there. So that's a first point of contact to look at what's there, what maps can you use, what's the information you can draw upon. The task force, the workshops, they're really good because when you join and register, you get opportunities to meet other planners and coordinators. And that's so powerful because often you feel so isolated from, you're doing this huge thing, but everybody else is doing this huge thing too. So I always recommend don't be in a silo, do actually connect with other people, other coordinators within the path in your region, because it's not about competing for the same people, but it's about, sharing resources and pooling to see if you can all benefit. The one I want to focus on is eclipse2024.org. And this is a website run by Dan McGlown. And he did Eclipse 2017. And for community coordinators, this was a really powerful website. And there's not enough time to go into it in detail. But what I will say is that you can look on, you can open up, there's a page for every community. So you can find your community, your town, click on it, and then you'll see the circumstances for the eclipse on the website. And there's a little visual that shows you what it will look like at the time on the eclipse day too. So, and and there is a place where you can actually upload all your planning and your events to this website. So it's a fantastic resource, and it's just expanded with even more resources. So I'd very much recommend everyone having a look at that. The white papers, I mentioned that I'm updating my white paper coming in another few weeks. And I've written 2 books specifically to help Eclipse coordinators. And totality was really the story of what it was like for a community to experience. And, small communities can actually do something like that book to actually have it as a legacy. And being in the shadow, I deliberately wrote that book. That was the book I was researching in 2012 to capture the change. And Eclipse coordinators have said that that's a really powerful book to try and allow them to understand the intensity of the experience and what it's like. So action points from today. I think you can all go away and maybe make these 3 actions. And it's good to go to a training and feel like, yeah, I know what I'm doing here. Try and put the Eclipse on the agenda at all your meetings from now on. So, your Chamber of Commerce meetings or tourism meetings, try and have it as a standing event, even if there's nothing to report on, but actually just have it there because it puts it in mind. Set up socials, and especially a web page, and that can be on the best site to represent it. So only do one for your community, but either within the tourism page or the council page, but try and find the best place to do it. Put it up now, and later on you'll be able to add to it, but it just alerts people to the fact that it's coming. And organize an Eclipse Forum if this hasn't already happened in your community. So bringing everyone together who normally organizes main events in your community, bring them together, share information, ask the question, what does this mean for us? And develop a strategy. And these are the questions you need to ask in that forum. What is our Eclipse USP? A unique selling proposition. So how are we different to anyone else along the path? What should our Eclipse legacy be? And how shall we brand and market our community? And I think once you ask yourselves those 3 questions, that's your Eclipse planning strategy. That's how you can move forward with things. So the core message from my first white paper, and remember that was written when there were very few resources around, was to start planning early, focus on the community in addition to Eclipse tourists, and consult with experts to prepare for the unknowns. And I'm updating the white paper, and my key messages from that is going to be, because we know so much more about it, the Eclipse is going to be huge. There's so much more awareness about it now. So you're not starting at the same point as those planning for 2017. But the key message is assemble your team, develop your strategy, and boldly go where no one has gone before. Make it big, make it memorable. So we might open up for questions. So I'll go back to Laura before we move on to the rest of the panel. So I shall stop screen sharing here.
Great. So I'll give you the claps from 141 of us.
No, it's so hard to get all the information. So you cannot convey the complexity of Eclipse planning in a short panel, but hopefully it's just a flavor of what's to come. But maybe the questions will be able to go into a few more specifics. Yeah.
And then after the questions, the panels, of course. But we really love to get your expertise here. And Lori, you're going to be going through the questions. Yes,
I will indeed. So they haven't been ranked, so I'll just take them in chronological order. And the first one Angela talked about yesterday to a bit is, will communities with 50 to 60% cloud cover and fairly near the edge of totality see an influx of visitors? And
yes.
Okay.
Yeah. Yes, and I think I'm going to raise this as the bigger question that everyone wants to know, which I didn't deliberately put on my presentation. How many people are you going to prepare for? There are 3 ways which I identified as ways to develop numbers. The first is based on population, and Michael Zieler did a number of maps which showed the drive sheds into the path of totality, and these were based on population figures, and he provided a like a low estimate and a high estimate. And for some communities, these numbers were scary. They were really very intimidating because it suggested a huge number of people. What we know in hindsight is that those population-based approaches tend to be overestimates. People didn't get the crowds that they were primed to get. There are some exceptions. So if you are a place that makes you unique along the path of totality, you may get more crowds. People in Texas are going to get more crowds because everyone is going to go there. If they remain in the US, if they're not going to Mexico, people who are going to be deliberately putting themselves in path of totality will try and get to Texas. But you will still get all the crowds along the cloudy bits. So the other two ways which we identified to move forward with identifying numbers is look at the existing events that you do in the community. How many people come along already to your largest event? And then you multiply that by some X factor. Now, it's hard to know what the X factor is, but at least it's double. We know that for a fact because people are coming in. It's a very big event, and anyone who's living in the community will have their house expanded. It's at least double. It could be 3 times as much if you're more towards the center line rather than on the edge of the center line. So sometimes you'll need to multiply by 4. That's the unknown bit, and it will always remain unknown because we won't know, we won't really know. The third is the capacity model. And I think this is the one that I favored and seemed to be the most accurate. And it's you can try and calculate how many people are likely to, what's the capacity of people in your community and plan according to that, and then have a spillover plan. And so you identify that by the population within your community, adding additional, I think it was either 2, 3, or 4 for each household, expecting that people are going to have others coming to stay. Look at your capacity for hotels, look at the extra capacity you're organizing for campgrounds, campsites, sporting fields, anywhere where you're accommodating extra people. And then, that gives you a pretty big figure. And then look at your parking capacity for people on the day. So you'll get an estimate of what that number is. So plan for that. That seemed to be the most helpful for people along the path.
Thanks. Do you know of any, just as an add-on, do you know of communities that checked with the airlines to see about capacity from, say, the week before? I know I went to Nashville and the plane was all full. Did anyone check with airlines, hotels, and just to figure out about occupancy equal to the year before? Was there any comparisons like that?
Yeah, there's a lot of information out there now. There are so many communities. So you can Google communities and what they did and the outcome of it. But I know on the panel, I know Trish, for example, she liaised a lot with the local. She will talk about this actually. So I think she will answer that. But there's a lot of liaison with all the transport facilities to look at extra capacity.
The next question that we have from Wayne Wooten was how to involve the local TV weatherman in the planning. That's a NASA question, I would think, but.
Actually, I can address that if you don't mind.
Sure, go ahead.
So this is Rick Feinberg from the AAS. We have a media relations subcommittee. We talked about subcommittees yesterday. We're not planning to ramp up the activity from that subcommittee right away because we learned last time around that the media is basically not interested in the eclipse until fairly shortly before it. But this subcommittee will be very actively trying to involve TV and radio weather forecasters because for many people, at least in the United States, if you ask them to name a scientist, that's going to be one of the first people they name is their local TV meteorologist. And so we know that they can be very valuable. So that's in the plan.
Thanks, yeah. Rick.
And I think it's part of getting those people, the local people on your local eclipse planning panel. But it raises a bigger point about community planning versus national planning. And the national media, as you say, Rick, it seems to be the main things is a week in advance. But the community media will always be interested in eclipse articles. And it's about having a proactive media plan, actually having a link with the journalists who are writing, inviting them there. The community newspaper is really important, and they can actually start doing a countdown, even 3 years out. Countdown to totality and have that as a feature once a week or every day in the newspaper. But making it proactive rather than reactive and giving the media stories to present on is a really great way of engaging people. And I found in the US, the local radio stations had the best outreach. So I would say, always try and make sure that you're doing engaging with the local radio and bringing people on, just little updates that you can do.
Thanks. The next question from Christine Schelpe is, what percentage of Eclipse watchers in 2017 were local versus other groups, particularly drivers, last minute people? I don't know. I'll let you help out on that one.
Does anyone know that?
I think that's a really
I can jump in on that one too.
Yeah. Okay.
All right.
So can I.
Yeah. So let's see if our answers agree. So
Okay.
the University of Michigan did a study. It wasn't a particularly well formulated study, but nevertheless, I would say they guesstimated that about 24 million people saw totality. And from Michael Zeiler's maps, we know that about 12 to 13 million people lived within the path. So one could probably reasonably safely guesstimate that about half the people who saw it lived within the path, and half the people who saw it traveled to the path. How does that square with your thinking, Michael?
Yeah, that's close. Michael Zeiler, his stats said 12.25 million people were already within the path, and about 6.5 million people, according to him, travel to totality. So pretty close. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that I'd probably believe his numbers more than I believe the Michigan numbers, because that if you get into the details of how they did the survey, it wasn't terribly good. But in astronomy, a factor of 2 uncertainty is perfectly
You're
acceptable.
right on.
But by the way, everybody, that's Michael Bakich, who is retired from Astronomy Magazine, but still writes a lot of articles for them.
But that's not to say even if they were in totality, they still traveled some distance. There were some people who, it wasn't right in their hometown. So there may have been some distance that they had to, but not overnight type travel. Anyway, the next question, I'm not quite sure I understand the question, but from Letitia Farrer, do you have the link for the pre-gathering? I'm not sure. Was that something, you mentioned many publications, Kate, so I'm not sure I know what the specifics are. If someone can help me out.
I'm not sure, Letitia, what you mean by the pre-gathering. Maybe you can update the question just to give a bit more information about that.
That might have been about the AAS pre-gathering.
Okay, thanks.
Lori, let's do one more question, and then
Okay.
we'll do panel after that.
Are the Eclipse strategies for communities in the path of totality? If so, what tips would you share for communities not in the path? And this is from Padma.
That's a great question, actually, Padma, because the resources tend to be focused within the path of totality. And outside the path of totality, people still experience the partial eclipse. And, I think there was a feeling yesterday being talked about that that people, living outside of the path often make that choice not to come into the path. And that can be frustrating for us. But actually, people are not eclipse chasers, people are not scientists or astronomers, they don't understand, and that's okay. But if you're outside of the path, they actually found that there was a lack of science resources, educators, because they all traveled into the path. And so it's very difficult to access any of resources, especially eclipse glasses. So there was such a need. So it's a really good question. I don't think there are many easy answers to that, but perhaps in planning, we need to make sure that we also distribute information and resources to those near to the path.
I could comment to that just a little bit from the NASA perspective. And we did actually find out about as many events as we could that were happening outside the path. Lots of things at libraries. And so many of them made sure to connect with the live streams that we had. And we sent resources, glasses, informational packets. Certainly it can be done better and be more organized, but it was, it was definitely a good first step, I think.
Okay, so thank you, Alex. And I just want to make sure we have some time for the panel introductions and also to kind of continue this discussion. I know we have more questions. So thank you so much, Kate. That was fantastic. And I'm sure people are going to be reaching out to you. And I look forward to reading your white paper, multiple ones. And I just also wanted to just introduce Laurel Radow. Is from the university. She used to work at the U.S. Department of Transportation and has been tirelessly advocating for eclipse planning within that institution and beyond. And so thank you, Lori, for helping with the questions and answers. And if there's anything you wanted to add to your bio.
So I was at Federal Highway, and in 2016, someone called me up and said, eclipses. And I said, what? And did a fact sheet in a very short amount of time to get out to the state DOT emergency managers. So as far as I know, one of the first few fact sheets on transportation. I'll find the link and share it with you, but that is a critical player. And I will make a pitch not only for the local weather people, but talk to your local traffic reporter. You see him every morning at 12:10 after the hour to tell you, well, not these past year, but there's a lot of good information in transportation. So more to follow over the course of the year. But thanks, Laura.
Great. Wonderful. Yes, all things transportation. We've got Lori there. All right, so I would like to introduce, so Kate will remain on our panel for questions. And now we're going to bring in some other voices. So we're going to start next with Trish, and then after Trish, I'll have Derrick, I'll have you present, and then Jennifer, I'm going to have you wrap up the 5-minute presentation. So this is a reminder, it's a five minutes, and I'll pipe in if it's going a bit longer. So Trish Erzfeld was born and raised in Perryville, Missouri. She's the director of Perry County Heritage Tourism, which she built and operated since its inception in 2015. In 2016, Trish created the Perry County Eclipse Task Force for the 2017 eclipse. The task force grew to over 50 people, including city, county, regional, and state leaders. Perryville hosted 5 large separate events and other activities and distributed or sold over 31,000 pairs of eclipse glasses through the tourism office. 38 states and 17 countries were represented in Perry County during the Great American Eclipse 2017, and many are planning to return because she's one of those few that will still be in the path for the 2024 eclipse. Trish's latest achievements include being a 2018 graduate of the Delta Leadership Institute's Executive Academy, Missouri Division of Tourism's 2018 Missouri's Rising Star, 2018 Missouri's Innovator Award. And Trish also serves on Missouri's International Dark Sky Board of Directors and the Missouri Humanities Board of Directors. So it's with great pleasure that I turn it over to you, Trish.
Thank you. So who has my PowerPoint?
I do. And I will share my screen. Let me get it up for you.
Okay, here we go. To just give you an idea, Perry County, Missouri is a county of less than 20,000 people. The city of Perryville make up nearly half of our population. We are a rural Midwest community, and we were predicted to double, if not triple, our population on Eclipse Day. So we immediately began educating our community on what an eclipse exactly was. We started planning about 2 years in advance, and we've done this through public and organizational presentations, such as your Rotary, your Chamber of Commerce, bank power lunches, fire district meetings. Wherever I could find an audience, I spoke. So start looking for those people and those organizations that are in your community. Next slide, please. When we started planning, two questions surfaced very early. First, what was all the fuss about? And second was, why go through all this trouble for 2 minutes and 40 seconds? We had to figure out a way to make the eclipse relatable to many different people. Our city and county officials, our local businesses, industries, our rural farmers, and our schools. So what was all the fuss about? We addressed in our educational presentations, making each eclipse, making the eclipse relatable to whichever group I was speaking to. And then why go through all this trouble? We addressed in this slide here, comparing the Kentucky Derby to our eclipse. Was a very fair comparison. We made it relatable to our city and county officials and our businesses on an economic level, but also on a city management level. Know that your audience will fall into 3 buckets: educational, experience, or economic impact. This is where you're going to gain your partnerships, your sponsorships, and what I like to call our local ambassadors. Because as a planner, we cannot do it by ourselves. Next slide. Start forming your task force now. It was the best thing that I ever done. My task force started with only 4 people that I called my core group, and we quickly grew to over 50 volunteers and professionals in their fields. For our community planners out there, remember that these are your experts in your community. Use them and let them know that they're valued, because they will be an important player the day of eclipse. Next slide. Those serving on your task force will be instrumental in working through the situations and locating the resources that you need. You may not be able to solve every problem that your task force thinks of, but especially in our smaller communities, at least you're going to be on the same page. Next slide. Start identifying your public locations. Where do you want your visitors to go? Now, Perryville had 4 public locations. We didn't have a stadium that would hold 30,000 people in our community. So we divided locations, and we customized each one of those locations to fit various visitor needs. Our city park was promoted for visiting schools. Our 40-acre picnic ground, which was located 1 mile from Interstate 55, had an easy on and off access. So that's where we sent our coach buses full of eclipse visitors for the day, because we knew that the traffic congestion was going to be a wild card. Our soccer complex of 10 soccer fields supported absolutely no shade during the heat of the day. So that is where we set up our mobile hospital that was brought in by our regional emergency management team. And then pictured here, our Perryville Regional Airport welcomed 147 airplanes of various sizes for a unique fly-in eclipse experience. So be thinking of those locations. You may have only one, but then you may have more than one. My last slide, please. So we did have 16 countries and 38 states represented in Perry County in 2017, but we did not double our population that day. We did sell or distribute 31,000 pairs of eclipse glasses, which was more than our county's population. And over a 4-day Solar Fest event, our hotels were full, our restaurants were at capacity, hundreds of gallons of gasoline were sold, and people had an amazing time. So we are looking forward to hosting our next eclipse event in 2024. So I can take questions. That's a lot in 5 minutes.
That was a lot. And Trish, what I'm going to ask, I'm going to have all the panelists do their little presentations, short, And then we'll do general questions. So what I ask our audience is, if you have specific questions with what Trish just told us, if you would write those down to remember, or put them in the Q&A, because we'll come back to all those. So thank you very much. Okay, so our next panelist will be Derrick Pitts. Derrick is currently the chief astronomer and director of the Fels Planetarium at the Franklin Institute. He runs the City Skies program, which seeks to point out that the night sky is available to everyone, everywhere, without special equipment. This project prepares neighborhood and community leaders in Philadelphia to use simple but effective observation tools and NASA's educational web content to help their inner city Philadelphia neighbors learn about space science and technology, and also about their city and themselves by knowledgeably exploring the sky. I love this quote on the Franklin Institute website. It says, "For many Philadelphians, Derrick Pitts is the Franklin Institute." It tells you what great outreach he does. Since 1978, Derrick has been teaching us to look up and to wonder about what we see up there. He appears regularly in the media as a science content expert, including appearances on the Colbert Report, on Comedy Central, and the Late Late Show with Craig Ferguson on CBS. Derrick organized and ran a large event for the 2017 eclipse in Philadelphia. He's here to share his experience planning for solar eclipse events in urban areas. Okay, so Derrick, I have your slides as well, and I will share them here.
Great, thanks, Laura. Can everybody hear me okay?
We can.
Great, thank you. Okay. So good afternoon, everybody. Thank you so much for having me. It's a great pleasure to be part of this particular workshop. Since I only have 5 minutes, I just want to tell you how we got started with this. Let's go to my first slide, please, when you're ready, Laura. The Franklin Institute, being the 800-pound science gorilla around the Philadelphia area, was, of course, expected to do something for the 2017 solar eclipse. You know, it only makes sense. In that we do astronomy programming of all kinds throughout the course of a year for our general public audiences, both regular daytime programming where we have our observatory open on the rooftop for public observing, evening programs throughout the year, and special programs throughout the year as well. So of course it made sense that we were going to be doing something for the eclipse. Where we were in Philadelphia, of course, it was only going to be a partial eclipse. So for us, it wasn't so much about how are we going to engage people coming into the city to see the eclipse, as it was really for us being able to lead an effort in which we can pull together as many people in a quote unquote underserved audience as possible. Now, underserved typically can be defined as people of color. I often also include in that people who are not normally connected to astronomy as being underserved as well. And so in this instance, and thinking about that particular audience for us, we now realize that we had two audiences that we were going to be trying to serve in various ways on this day. One would be the audience that normally would come to the Franklin Institute for a visit. And that audience would include people who were just coming to the Franklin Institute, but it would also include people who might come to the Franklin Institute to see the eclipse. Knowing that we had an observatory, the expectation of that audience is, oh, we can all go to the observatory and look at it through a telescope. And of course, no, that's not what's going to happen at all. And so we had to consider that audience coming to the Franklin Institute. But at the same time, we wanted to think about that underserved audience that's spread across the region that may not come to an institution to see this, but wants to see it, wants to experience it somehow. The way the idea of the phenomenological approach, as Kate described it, is very much the approach that we had to this, because we knew that a lot of people had heard about the event and wanted to experience it one way or another. So that's how we focused our attention. So first of all, of course, for the Franklin Institute's event, what we did was we created a typical Franklin Institute outside the building event. Next slide, please. What we did was we took over the side street to the Franklin Institute where we could block traffic and we could bring all of our observing resources out to this space that could accommodate a large number of people. So this allowed us to provide that authentic science experience on the Franklin Institute's property, but in a location that can easily accommodate a lot of people. And we can also have lots of equipment around for people to use. Next slide, please. So we, of course, brought to bear all of our volunteers that we have on staff and other staff to help facilitate that for those people who were at that location. But what's really most interesting about how we did the other outreach is that we used every one of our out-of-school time program partners, our community-based organization partners, as conduits into the communities that did not come to the Franklin Institute, but still wanted to have an experience. So what we did was, through any of those partners with whom we had any kind of science programming already established, we provided training sessions for them for how to engage their audiences in the experience of a partial solar eclipse. So for any of those out of school time audiences and any of the community-based organizations that we were connected with. In the introduction, you heard about the City Skies program. That was a NASA grant-funded program that reached out to 45 different community centers, 10,000 unique families over the course of the program. And that's one of those, that's a really good example of how we used a structure that was already in place for us to be able to reach out to those communities that might not come to the museum for one reason or another, but with whom we already had contact through science programs that we had been doing in the community. So we would use train the trainer models to train the facilitators at any of these locations. We would help them with equipment that they might be able to use in those locations, including sun spotters, telescopes for eyepiece projection, and eclipse viewers were provided to those community organizations. And those systems worked really, really well to help people understand that they could experience the eclipse right in their own communities. So it was more likely that we could have a larger number of family people involved in having that experience. Next slide, please. What we also encouraged them to do, this is an image of just some of the sun spotters we had. We used 35 sun spotters at the Franklin Institute location, but I had another 45 to 60 sun spotters distributed around the city in community centers and other out-of-school time program partners. That really helped. Next slide, please. And we also encourage people to make use of the black polymer solar viewing film, as you can see in these images right here, to create a tent in which people could stand under the tent in groups. Or if someone was in a wheelchair, they could easily stand or sit under this tent and look up and experience the eclipse together. And so we use that element also to help the experience be greater for people who are part of this. So as we did this with these various community groups, it worked out really, really well that we already had these networks in place. We started our work 3 years out with letting people know that was going to happen, started distributing solar eclipse viewers 2 years out, and then within a year, we would be in contact with these groups on a regular basis, helping them to shape how their programs were going to be set up and how they were going to work. And it worked out very, very well. So it was a great experience. We had a great experience. We know that we can go back to these partners for the upcoming eclipses and work again in the same way, and they will already have had some experience with this. Thanks.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Derrick. And just as with Trish, if you have questions for him, please put those into the Q&A, and then Lori will prioritize those. Although you all also can prioritize, there's a way to say if you want that question answered. So as a participant, so go ahead and do that.
To go live. Ah.
Okay, and yes, we are about to go live, Jennifer.
Sorry, my husband was running past me. Like, get out
how it happens. Well, welcome. You're looking great there. Hold on one sec. I'm going to introduce you though. Okay, so next up is Jennifer Godfrey. She's a park ranger from the Oregon Parks and Recreation Department. She's a trainer for new interpretive staff within the agency, and her passion for astronomy allowed her to become instrumental in preparing Oregon state parks for the 2017 total solar eclipse. Jennifer worked closely with community educators and other agencies to not only emphasize the excitement of the eclipse, but to advocate for ways to properly prepare and adjust work functions to allow for the influx of visitors and possible congestion. Her goal is to provide you with the wisdom of hindsight. Jennifer is excited to be talking with you and is live from her home in Staten, Oregon. Okay.
Hi there.
And I'll start sharing the slides.
I'll do the share screen here. Hang on.
Great.
Okay. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Perfect. So yes.
We see your whole desktop though.
Ah, okay. I shared the wrong screen. One moment, please.
You have to go up to the top and just, yeah. There.
PowerPoint slideshow. There we go. My apologies. Bumpy start.
No worries. Yeah, perfect.
Okay, so again, my name is Jennifer Godfrey. I work for Oregon State Parks. At the time of the eclipse, I was in Detroit Lake State Park, which is a very remote park on the Cascades. I'm currently in a job rotation in the Contracts and Procurement Division, but at the time, I was out in the field at Detroit. We were very full during the eclipse, and the state parks had to adjust in many different ways. The primary way that I was very grateful for was that we had buy-in from our executive team. So pictured in this is Robert Smith, Bevan Clapper, Eric Timmons, and Neil Howard, and they were instrumental at headquarters for getting the buy-in from our administration and to help facilitate a lot of the logistics that were needed out in the field. I felt that that was very critical, and that prior to their buy-in, it wasn't taken as seriously. So I feel like once we had the executive team excited and on board, things got really got going. And some of the things that we were having to tackle, because it was in August, was not only the traffic, but we had forest fires to worry about, and health and infrastructure, because the path of totality followed a very rural highway that was single lane in many places, and the hospitals were very far in between. So they worked with the Oregon Office of Emergency Management, and each agency brought people to the table to prepare for the eclipse. And then they generated a series of talking points. And these talking points were used for messaging to make sure that all state messaging was consistent. So this was really helpful. And some of the topics that the agency had to tackle were not only safety and trip planning, but traffic services, and we had reservation holder things that we needed to take care of. One of the biggest ones was making sure that you either require or comp that night after the eclipse to make sure people aren't all rushing out, because a friend on here said earlier that it's a lot like fireworks. People straggle in, but after the eclipse, they all want to jet out at the same time. So just making sure that that you have that in there. So thank you, Theo, for that comment. The camping options, we had to create additional sites, and we also had day use areas that we were utilizing, and eye protection. You may have heard yesterday about the issue of fraudulently marketed or not appropriate eyewear. State Parks is very concerned that we are encouraging safety, and so we partnered with Rainbow Symphony and created Oregon State Park specific glasses that were branded so that we knew if they had those glasses, they were safe for all of our visitors. As you can see, we were in one of the main drive sheds of the Great American Eclipse. This is a significant factor when you are planning your eclipse, because it will tell you what is the rate of congestion that you can expect. We were in the 6th biggest drive shed with an estimated 25 million people traveling the I-5 corridor to get to the path of totality. But then it got even more narrow when they got off of the I-5 corridor and got on the tiny little Highway 22 that led to the point of best clarity, which was in Madras, Oregon. So they would leave I-5, they would drive up 22 past my park on their way to Madras. And so it was very tightly funneled. And outside of that main highway, it was rural Forest Service roads. So we created over 1,000 new sites, and we used a lot of these Eclipse maps that have been mentioned before to help scout spots where we were going to have good eclipse viewing areas. We also were very grateful for the help that we received through the Astronomical Society of the Pacific. Their help was invaluable. I highly recommend you sign up for their upcoming conference and Curiosity Girls at the Telescope class. You get way more than just the astronomy stuff. We put folks in group picnic areas. As you can tell, this is a very remote setting with one vault toilet. Get your porta potties early. So here is that Silver Falls view aerial and from on the ground for the path of totality. One thing that we worked hard on was making sure that we had areas all along the path of totality. This one was at Willamette Mission State Park. It was probably our flattest and most accessible location. Make sure you get wheelchair accessible vault toilets as well as part of your planning, because you want to make sure that you have accessible sites, not just additional sites. We brought in staff from outside parks, and we had them in different places, and we stacked folks in like sardines. That's the designated swimming area. So we stacked them 3 cars deep based on when they wanted to leave. And so the folks that wanted to stay longer were in the back, and then we stacked them in front. We had EMTs on hand, of course. We had a full menu of planning at all of the locations along the path of totality. This is just a few. We invited expert astronomers in because all of our staff was on hand for safety and things like that. So we brought in astronomers and as volunteers and placed them along the path of totality. These are some of them. This is Teresa Summer doing the yardstick demonstration and holding up the Braille book. That Braille book is fantastic. Get one for this one because they are useful not just for the visually impaired, but also for your sighted folks. And as for after parties, one of the things that we did to help mitigate traffic was we created a series of activities and fun festival-like events that kept people remembering their activities, and also it kept them off the highways. So if you were making art and getting your face painted, you weren't climbing into the car and hopping onto 22 and trying to fight the Madras crowd that was also leaving. So keep things going into the night. All right, and separate your spaces. I know your demographic.
Wonderful, thank you. I know there's so much good stuff in there. You want to summarize one more thing that we might have missed in your?
No, just make sure that when you're thinking about your barriers, that you're not just helping to mitigate the barriers, but that you're actually working to remove the barriers. So,
awesome. That is a great
demographic.
Okay, yeah, you can leave that slide up for a minute.
Okay.
Thank you so much. Okay, so we have now time we've got at least 15 minutes, and I think Rick said we could go in a little longer, but in any case, we have at least 15 minutes to answer questions.
Great.
So Jennifer, if you stop sharing, and if all our panelists would please turn on your video. And then Lori, sorry, Lori. Okay, take it away.
Trying to make the most of these short 15 minutes. Sorry, didn't mean to.
No, actually, guys, you have the break isn't until 45 minutes after the hour, so we actually have 30 minutes.
Oh, okay. Great presentations. One from a very rural site. One, Derrick's is not in a path of partial in a major city, and Jennifer in a state park. So 3 different models. That was a great picture for us to see of how one size does not fit all. And I've got a couple questions starting off with Trish. And Trish, did your farmers report any problem with eclipse visitors trespassing the crops, damaging fences, and disturbing livestock? So yeah, serious questions.
And they were questions that we asked ourselves as well. We are right along the Mississippi River where the eclipse path crossed into Illinois. So we thought we would have, between us and Carbondale, the most totality. So we really feared for some of our farmland and stuff. But we did not. We had 4 viewing locations and we were able to send most people to that. We probably had more problems with people parking along the highways and the side roads. But I'm happy to say all of our farmers were like, they just thought it was the greatest thing when it was over. They all had their parties too, you know, and it was really great to hear the farmers afterwards, because I felt like they were maybe the most disconnected of some of our groups. But to hear that the cow came to the barn, the rooster really did crow. They're going to be some of our biggest fans in 2024. So,
did any of your farmers rent space for viewers?
We had some that would do parking that were close to highways and stuff. If we had groups, we tried to find groups to send to those locations, and then they took care of them from there.
Thanks. This question is more for Trish, but if the others want to pop in, feel free. At what level is it more efficient to do most of the planning in your experience? Neighborhood, city, regions, province? It's not the United States question, or country. It's a, you know, Derrick, with regard to neighborhood, that might be more. How do you get, you had people coming from both New Jersey and all around, and that sort of, but you were in a partial, what sort of thoughts can you share?
So for how to work with the neighborhoods, you know, the way I started out with it, the way we started out with the neighborhoods was to use these networks that we already had established with the community-based organizations where we already had programming. So that gave us that kind of reach. And out-of-school time programs, other out-of-school time programs also gave us that opportunity to get that reach. But, you know, we've heard the use of libraries before. A novel outreach component that we used were through neighborhood churches. That worked out really well too, because, you know, this was all really connected to what Kate said about the phenomenological piece of it, where everybody wanted to experience it, whether they, you know, were into science or not. They were all told that they had to experience this. So we facilitated that by providing locations where people could go to in their own neighborhoods to have this experience. And then, as I said, we provided the training that was necessary for folks and the materials that might be needed for all of the activities that went on at those locations. So that's how it worked best for us, because at the next levels up, you know, in the government levels of the city, you know, they were much more focused on tourism in other, you know, realms rather than on the Eclipse side, understanding that they weren't in the path of totality. And essentially left it to the Franklin Institute to take care of this sciencey thing. And of course, by, you know, 2 days before, everybody, all the late entrance people, thank you very much, Kate, wanted to jump on the bandwagon. So we had to be able to accommodate that as well.
Thank you. And an important story, if you're outside the path, of how to keep people engaged as you were doing. I think that's a very important lesson for us to keep in mind.
Well, you know, let me just say one more thing about that really quickly, and that is, you know, those of us who are outside the path, we still have to serve a huge number of people that want to have the experience. The experience for them is just as valid, in a sense, an authentic science experience, as being in the path of totality, with the idea, knowing that many people can't get there. So we have to provide just as good an experience as much as we can for those people.
Perfect, thank you. And Trish, you talked a lot about going everywhere within Perryville to get to the Chamber of Commerce and everywhere else. And how did you work with the neighborhoods and other levels of the population? Or yours is such a rural area, you kind of put it all together?
Kind of going back to your last question, we did so much planning on our local level, and we really drew our partners in that they were specialized to work in. But you really have to work on a regional level if you are in a rural community, because you're not going to have enough of the resources that you need for that particular day. For instance, our emergency management, I did not know this until they told me, but they are required to do trainings where they set up a mobile hospital somewhere. They have to do this training. And I'm like, well, I've got the perfect place for you to do that. And then we utilize that hospital for a place where people could go to get in out of the heat and stuff. So, I mean, we worked locally with our city and our county, and if you look at my slide for, you know, our Eclipse task force, it really, we started out with what was vital and important, which is your location, your Eclipse glasses, your porta potties, but then it goes on to what are your hotel accommodations and what are your traffic issues are going to be. And these are the people that are on your task force that are going to tell you the resources that they have locally, but then they can reach out regionally. We even thought, you know, we wanted to plan for our residents first, and we knew that if we could provide a really great experience for them, other people would just gravitate to our area. And that is what happened, because, you know, we knew we had to bring in extra ambulances just in case, you know, someone had a need across town. We had to station 2 ambulances here or 1 ambulance here. With our airport, FAA kicked in and we had to have a fire engine down there. We had to have an ambulance with the influx of air traffic that we had that day. We have the largest airport between St. Louis and Memphis. And so it was a spectacular event, but the resources we had to provide down there took away from our city. But we didn't have a problem bringing people regionally in because everybody wanted to be within the path. So use that leverage to your advantage.
Good reminder, thanks. And Jennifer, you were at a state level organization, and I don't know how much, as you say, it's a rural park, so I don't know how much of there was a population outside the park that you needed to keep involved, but you certainly talked a lot about the state coordination, and that's another model that needs to be everyone needs to think about.
There were a ton of people, and there is a slide that has just the sheer volume of the crowd. I had them climbing on rocks. I had them out in the lake. We had them in the city, and then we had them, let's see here, where's that one? Oh, that's the one. So this is the one from the coast to the Capitol to the east side of the state. That's our director in the top left. But yeah, we were dealing with populations in all different areas. We also brought in the ambulances. We had what are called cows, but basically cell phone tower boosters. Our Eric Timmons invested in satellite phones that were issued for each region. But I am happy to say that after the eclipse, a lot of these things that we invested in have been repurposed. So most of the communications investment that we made were turned into emergency response trailers. And those emergency response trailers were vital in this last year's forest fires. So we moved those emergency response trailers that had the satellite phone, that had all of the communications information and stuff. We moved those around to the fires. So the things that we created, somebody mentioned earlier about the Olympics. So the infrastructure that you create for the eclipse, one good buy-in for your supervisors, for your administrators is, can you repurpose these items? And so a lot of the emergency safety equipment that we invested in became utilized elsewhere. But yes, we had people everywhere.
Great, thank you. Derrick, there are a lot of questions about the black polymer. I think a lot of the questions or comments in here can be repackaged, just rather than answering them all here, they will turn into wonderful FAQs and fact sheets. So rather than, but just to let you know that people are interested in and I'll let you answer about the polymer, but it may just be that you don't know the manufacturer off the top of your head, and we can follow up later. You're on mute.
So I saw that question coming up in the Q&A, and I thought I'd wait until we could do it this way, so many people could see it. So this is a card that I had made up of solar viewers. And this is the black polymer material. You can see that it describes when the eclipse is going to occur. I had these made 3 years ahead of the event and started distributing them 3 years out. And this material is made by Thousand Oaks Optical, www.thousandoaksoptical.com. I know them, of course I know them very well, because I still have about 500 of these left over after I distributed about 10,000 of them around the city for free under the NASA City Skies grant. So I use these as a way to promote the eclipse, 3 years out, and to provide an observing experience for people no matter where they were. And that worked out really, really well. So yeah, thank you very much, Rick. Thousand Oaks Optical. Now, the way I did the tents was that once Thousand Oaks Optical stopped taking orders for viewers and glasses, everybody realized that they couldn't get glasses from Thousand Oaks anymore. But what I came to realize was that they had rolls of black polymer material in 100-foot lengths that no one was purchasing. So I bought 6 rolls of 100-foot material, and then I cut it to use it as I saw fit to use it. And one of the ideas that we came up with was building the tents that you saw. The tent frame, of course, already exists. It just has a different cover on it. I had my team take the other covers off and use the black polymer material to cover the top, and it worked out really well for accessibility and just for a group experience of observing the partial eclipse. That way you have a group of people underneath the tent all going, ooh, together. So it worked out really nicely.
Excellent. This is a question that I think I'll let any of the panelists answer. What about Aboriginal communities in the path of totality? There is experience about getting them involved in community. Is there experience in getting them involved in community planning and incorporate their cosmological vision? And I understand that was part of the discussion yesterday. So if anyone wants to help answer that one.
I will say that at least in Oregon, I know that the tribes were involved in hosting locations. I'm not particularly sure about the tribal involvement and any kind of cultural mores. I know that there are certain tribes that view it as a negative thing to watch an eclipse. So I didn't personally engage with any of the local tribes, but I do know that the ones that were that had the casinos did host people like as lodging locations. I just know logistics.
Thanks.
I think in some parts, I can't remember exactly where, but I took part in some radio panel interviews with tribal elders, and they were talking about, there were about 5 of us on a panel once, and talking about what the eclipse meant for them and the events that they were planning on doing. And I think that happened across the path of totality. So I think there's a lot out there that maybe we can't answer, but other people may know the answer to. But it is important that we, anyone who's within the path of totality and outside of the path, that we actually incorporate everybody's perspectives and experiences, and it really adds to our understanding and all the things that can be offered as part of the whole eclipse experience, not just totality.
Yes.
I
Yeah, and I
could
wanted
speak
to
just
add,
really quickly to that.
Okay.
Sorry, Laura, go ahead.
I'll go.
I was just going to say there was a lot of activity with indigenous groups for the 2017 eclipse, in particular through groups like the Indigenous Education Institute, Navajo Nations, Cherokee, because of course this hit Smoky Mountain National Park down in the south. So there are a lot of videos they made. They did a lot of talking to the communities and recording a lot of that. So there's a lot of that information. Some of it is on the NASA sites. A lot of it was supported by the different NASA education communities, primarily through the Science Mission Directorate.
Thanks. Laura.
Yeah, I just want to add one more thing, which is I know sometimes people get very excited about kind of gathering those stories and sharing them out if they're not their own. But I just want to remind you that there's an intellectual property situation here where those stories really belong to the tribes themselves. And it's always important to get permission to either share those or have them share their own stories. So just wanted to put that.
Reminder, thank you. A question again for all the panelists, and probably starting with Derrick. How were STEAM events included on Eclipse days, and are any that were successful for after the Eclipse event, are they available for use to share with our communities for their buy-in and to engage them? So how did you make use of STEAM and STEM?
Sure. So one of the activities that we did lots of artwork activities, because those were very easy for us to facilitate in an outside venue, nearby the museum. But it also worked really well for community centers, because any of these community outreach centers always have art materials available for students to work with. So for various other things. So what we encouraged them to do was to add into the science activities that were being done any other activities that that might also lend themselves to this. So, for example, people could do, or families could do art projects of various kinds, whether they were a drawing or paint or chalk, or they could do storytelling about science experiences that they'd had that were related to this. We encouraged all kinds of things like that that could go on. At the same time, the science materials that we had distributed to these locations, we encouraged continued use of them, particularly the solar eclipse viewers, so that families could continue to observe the sun, both before and after the eclipse. And we encourage them to make whatever drawings they could using the viewers of what the eclipse looked like to them.
Thank you. Jennifer, it looked like there was a lot of activity that you had, and I love the idea of how you got people to stay over and not all leave at the same time. So making use of educational opportunities, and to that end, someone has asked for the source of your Braille book. So if you can provide that link, I'm sure that will be greatly appreciated.
I will find it. I was given them as a gift at one of the Eclipse planning conferences.
Thanks.
And we placed them throughout the path of totality. But yes, keeping folks active. After the eclipse, art and music and expression are very valuable. Prior to the eclipse, folks are very interested in the whys and the hows and understanding what they're going to be experiencing. We brought in scientists, so we actually cordoned off different sections of area. So there were areas where scientific experimentation was going on. There were areas where we had photographers and that sort of thing. This was the photographer section. This was the science section. So the science section was I kept people away from expensive equipment. And then the photographer section, and then, but we had areas for the general public as well. So just making sure that you're accommodating the needs of your public through the programming that you use. So you can have academic activities, you can have interactive activities, and then afterwards, just that reminiscing activities, things that help them to understand, comprehend, and digest what they experienced was really valuable.
Thank you. Laura, I don't know if this is when we make the pitch of we have, part of this is to get people interested in becoming members of the local government planning task force, because a lot of questions in here are saying, how can you help us? And it's a two-way street. We need your help. A lot of good ideas. And if you are in the path of totality, we'd love, that's coming up, or if you were involved in the 2017, or you don't even have to have been in the path of totality. You all have good ideas, and there's a lot to do in the next 3 years. And in these series of questions, I see a lot of good fact sheets coming out of here, or a lot of answers to FAQs. So we can't answer everything today. How does that sound, Laura? Do we do a little advertisement now? Is this a good time to do a pitch?
Yep, I think you did a good pitch, and I see in the chat Rick and Claire are putting the information on how to join. And then I do see, it seems like Kate and Trish might want to also answer.
Oh, good. Okay, good. Thank you.
So we'll let them, Kate,
Go
why
ahead.
don't you go
Yes.
next? And then if there's other things to add, Lori, maybe we can put more about that in the chat. So,
Yes.
okay, great.
Okay, I just want to, because there's a general feel, and I think our panelists have got such amazing experience, and this isn't something that was asked directly, but I think is an indirect point. And maybe each of the panelists can talk to this. It's that idea that nobody is in charge of eclipse planning. You know, that idea that you don't feel like you're the expert, you're just someone who's in the right place at the right time. Suddenly you're having to make all these amazing decisions, you know, that you just think that's not my job, that's not my role. And initially you have to make that balance between, gee, I can't say that, or you're feeling like you're waiting for permission to do something. And then you have to overcome that and then just go ahead and do it anyway. And Derrick, you said something about that with the tents. Trish, you said something about that with the, you know, the emergency training that you organized. Jennifer, you said something about that too. So maybe if you can talk about that dilemma, because that's a really fascinating thing that helps people overcome that angst of making suggestions.
I think, well, maybe I think that all of our communities want the best for the people who live around them. And so, you know, all of these experts that are hopefully going to help you through this process, you know, they have great resources. And so just let them do their jobs. We're all being trained in whatever field we're in. So let them bring the best of what they have to your community. And you'll get a lot of your answers there. So build your teams.
I just want to echo what Trish said, and she said something about the emergency management people and about training. I got to chat with the fellow, the emergency manager at Jackson Hole, Wyoming, as he prepared for, I talked to him in 2016, prepared for 2017. He got a Department of Homeland Security grant to run an exercise in preparation for the eclipse. He went to them, did it in June of 2016, way ahead of schedule. So if you're in a state in totality, go talk to your state emergency management agency and ask if you can participate in something like that. I assume DHS still does that sort of thing. And he was very prepared. And I also saw the comments about the airport in Jackson Hole, Wyoming. And he explained to me they only had so many slots and they sent everyone else down to Denver. So you're absolutely right. There are lots of, and as Trish said, work with the experts. They know the details, they know the operations. You don't have to take everything on, but you have the enthusiasm. But there's a lot of knowledge, as Jennifer said, at the state level, and partner with them, and a lot of knowledge at the local government level. The local departments of everything. They all do street events and everything like that. So they are pretty familiar with the basics. So you're not starting from zero, but you're right, Kate. You're right, Kate, in that they were not prepared for eclipses, and that Trish's visual of it's dark for 2 minutes. It was whoever slide it was. It's dark for 2 minutes. Who cares? I had heard that from every transportation person I talked to. So, but make use of the professionals in your local and state governments.
So Kate, just to answer that from my perspective was, yes, the getting the permission to get the ball rolling was kind of a hard thing because I was the passionate person out in the field and I needed to motivate a train. So the, state agencies are a lot like a train. They're very slow to take off, but then once they get going, there's fantastic momentum. And so just getting enough coal in the fire to get things going, to get the train moving. It really is about inspiring the right people and inspiring the people that have leverage and that have that momentum with themselves within your agency or within your state. So take that passion, inspire the right person, and get their buy-in. That was really the most useful thing for me.
Jennifer, if I can riff off of that with two things. You know, you use the analogy of getting the train moving. For me, the analogy was trying to get an enormous freighter loaded with shipping containers to move in any particular direction. In that, interestingly, it was really difficult for me to get my institution to actually start moving on this. And it really took me a while to get them to understand exactly what was going to happen. The sort of upshot of this was that they underestimated what the attendance was going to be at our museum by a factor of 2. But you're right, I was the enthusiastic person, and I had to get all these people motivated to realize that this major thing was going to happen, and that worked out well. But the other thing that I wanted to talk about just a little bit is about, you know, the fact that build your teams. And the teams that I built were comprised of those folks that we already had in place in the community centers. And I leaned on them heavily because they know their audiences. I can help them with content and materials, but they know their audiences. So we work together in that way, in that they engage their audiences directly because of that pre-existing knowledge. I help them with the stuff beforehand. But another critical member of the team for us in the urban area were another group of people that have a tremendous amount of experience and knowledge, and these are the amateur astronomers. They worked out really, really well for us. And if you think about it, in many ways, an event like this is very much like a star party. You know, it's very much like a very large star party. For those of us who have had experience at running star parties, this is like running a star party during the day. So the idea that you need, that you should have confidence in going in to get the ball rolling, if you have experience working with star parties, use that experience to help you get rolling with this and overcome your initial fear about pulling the trigger to go get things done in a timely fashion ahead of time as you need to, especially when it comes to doing things like ordering solar viewers. I had to, thank goodness I had a separate budget that I could use to order solar viewers. If I had waited for my finance department to kick in with the permission I needed to do that, I never would have been able to distribute as many solar viewers as we did.
Permissions, getting through the permissions is very critical. And then if you can get your marketing team involved, like state agencies with merch, that's how excited everybody was by the end of it.
Merch.
Okay, so we have to wrap up now. The time now, we're gonna invite people into the other Zoom to continue the discussion and to inspire that grassroots organization that we've been discussing. So I just want to thank each and every one of you for being here on our panelists on our panel, and again to Kate for your wonderful plenary. And I think we're all really looking forward to your next white paper. So thank you again. And Angela, Rick, is there anything else you want to announce for the ASP conference in general? Workshop?
I just want to let everybody know what time to come back. It's currently 15 minutes before 3 o'clock Eastern, 15 minutes before noon Pacific. The virtual networking lounge will be open for the next half hour. And I put the links in the chat. And then we're going to return at 15 minutes past the hour. That's a half hour from now for the for session 4 on state and national planning.
Okay. All right. We'll see you all in 30 minutes.